word iconic is lobbed around all too easily in these kinds of videos, but today I wanted to visit something that's been part of my motorsport interest for a very long time, because it seems to turn up in every rally game ever made because, well, it's iconic. There are other cars that often get labelled with that same term. I'll lob a picture of one such example on your screen for this next bit because there are far too many to name. You can also attach beautiful, stunning, dominant, controversial and brutal to the long list of adjectives and then throw them all into one happy clickbaity tabloid headline style video thumbnail. Don't forget the reaction face, the arrow and putting words in capitals for maximum effect, the real reason and so on. But today's subject is an icon because it changed the way that production car racing was handled, at least in rallying, around the start of the 1970s, and it went on to be dominant and then helped the particular brand that built it become the most successful marque in rallying history. Today's story is about the wedgie boy that is the Lancia Stratos. So to begin with this, we need to know what regulations the World Rally Championship was running at this particular point in time. We're now going back 50 years because that's when the car debuted and it started to roll off the production line. Now I don't know about you, but the 70s were 30 years ago and you can't convince me otherwise. Anyway, the WRC regulations were under what is known as Group 4. This rule set had first entered way back in 1954 and would be canned in 1982 when the FIA introduced Group B. Group 4 was sports cars which had a minimum of 50 units produced in a 12-month period, with at least one car built every month in those 12 months. So you could build 1 and then 49, or 1, 2, 47. As long as you produced at least one road-going version of that car in a 12-month period, it was eligible for racing. So you couldn't go 1, give up for 6 months, and then do the other 49. It had to be continuous production. Group 4 covered sports cars and rally cars, but it's the rally regulations we're going to concern ourselves with today, because the FIA at this time didn't do standardisation and it can just get confusing if we start overlapping all the time. So the World Rally Championship had started its first ever season in 1973, and found within it were sports cars complying with these Group 4 regulations. The Fiat 124 Abarth, the Alpine A110, Saab 99, Citroën DS21 and 23, and a Ford Escort RS 1600. All of these cars allowed under the regulations. Alpine had won the first ever manufacturers' championship with the A110, that buggy looking coupe that was quite successful in French rallying and had won the 1971 Monte Carlo with Ove Anderson. But that car was starting to get a little bit old and this rear engine French 911 was nearing the peak of what it could do. They couldn't get any more power out of the existing engine, and swapping to a dual overhead cam 16 valve engine was just making it blow up. Then the suspension changes made the car worse. It's safe to say that Alpine did dominate that season. Other manufacturers like Datsun, Toyota, Saab and Ford all got wins, but yeah, Alpine were the out-and-out winners there. There's also the phrase I've used earlier in this video, production car racing. For all intents and purposes, these cars were the road cars with very little modification and then sent out onto the rally stages of France, Greece, Wales and so on. They probably had upgraded brakes and upgraded suspension, but that was about it. The only reason they have roll cages is because today the historic rallies require them. They didn't have them back then. But it was essentially run what you brought, as long as you meet the homologation requirements, obviously. So Lancia was sitting there thinking, what do we do to win? Because that's all that matters. Winning. Lancia's main weapon up to this point had been the Fulvia. Lancia had been using this car in rallying since it departed Formula 1 in 1955, and Lancia had acquired a privateer rally team of Lancia enthusiasts to then give it some factory support. How many times can I say Lancia in one paragraph? And it was a highly successful car, winning the Italian Rally Championship every year between 1965 and 1973, and in 1972 the car had won the International Championship for Manufacturers with 2 rounds to spare. But, like the Alpine, it was getting old, and Lancia was focused on getting a car to the top, mostly because of politics. Fiat took over Lancia in 1969 because Lancia was losing copious amounts of money. That same year, they took a controlling interest in another Italian manufacturer, Ferrari. Cesare Fiorio was the boss of Lancia at the time, and I can only assume that keeping Lancia competitive in rallying would be a surefire way of making sure there's enough room for them and Ferrari under Fiat's ownership. Lancia in rally, Ferrari in Formula 1 and sports cars. Lancia had usually gone to Pininfarina for the design of the car, but this time they'd gone to Bertoni, who had been wanting to work with the Italian car maker for some time. Bertoni took the running gear of the Fulvia and built a body shape around it. When the prototype was built, it turned up at the Lancia factory and was able to drive under the barrier. much to the amusement of everybody there. So Lancia saw this and thought, okay, we can run with this, and started to figure out a way they could develop a rally car for the road. Yes, a rally car for the road, rather than designing a road car that would become a rally car like everybody had done before. Bertoni's designer Marcello Gandini had designed the Lamborghini Miura and had decided to go with a similar thing for what would become the Stratos. On top of this, Mike Parks was part of the engineering team along with rally driver Sandro Munari. To kick off the whole "this ain't a road car" design thing, the most overt part of this is the curved windscreen instead of a flat one like everybody else had, designed so that the driver had an unobstructed view into virtually every corner. Rear visibility though was like looking out of an old Victorian letterbox, but you're rallying, so why would you need to see out of the back? And the whole shell of the car was designed to be one piece, have easy access to everything, and also incorporated the mudguards. Minimal overhang meant that the wheelbase was incredibly short, just over 2.2 metres or, 6 foot 8 inches or so. Lancia's engineers also pored over everything to do with the car, so chassis, steering, suspension and the engine components, so that when they threw it at a rally stage, it was going to fit, and fit perfectly. The first prototype of the car was presented at the Turin Motor Show in 1970 on Bertoni's stand there, and it looked like something out of Captain Scarlet or Thunderbirds. This was called the Zero at this point and had the engine of the outgoing Fulvia mounted in the middle for weight distribution. Then, in 1971 at that same motor show, the Stratos HF that was a lot closer to the production model was on Bertoni's stand, and presented as a road car that had the engine of a Ferrari Dino mounted in the middle instead. But Lancia was insistent that the actual production model would have a different engine. In 1972 and 1973, Lancia entered the Stratos into rallies in the Group 5 category, which was for prototype cars. Meanwhile, the Fulvia had won the Monte Carlo Rally in the February of 1972, and Enzo Ferrari called up Lancia to say congratulations, and also to tell them that he was freeing up 500 246 Dino engines for Lancia to use in the Stratos. The Dino engine was being phased out, so the final 500 ever made were now freed up. In March, difficulties were being experienced with getting these engines. Enzo was deliberately holding out and waiting for Dino production to end before he handed them all over. In May, Ferrari gave 10 engines to Lancia to test them on the prototype Stratos, some of which were being used in rallies, with Lancia announcing in the August of 1972 that the car would have 240 horsepower, with a detuned version being sold as the Stratos HF Stradale. It wouldn't be until December that Enzo finally handed the rest of the engines over, but it's thought he only gave them 492 or so. A prototype of the Stratos HF was seen at the Targa Florio in 1973, where it came second, powered by the 2.4 litre V6 24-valve engine from the Dino. It also won the Firestone Rally in Spain and the Tour de France Auto, and at some point the first production Stratos rolled off the production line, as well as Lancia building a turbocharged version of that same car. I want to say that the car was homologated in time for 1974, but it wasn't really. I mean, it was, but it wasn't, because Lancia had exploited a loophole in the rulebook, which was basically statement of intent. You tell the FIA that you've got this car and you want to use it, and you build one, maybe a working prototype, or you build the working prototype and maybe 2, 5, 10 production cars that you are actually going to sell, and then you basically pinky promise the FIA that you're going to build the rest of them. But during the testing phase, Lancia had some issues that needed ironing out quickly. The 1972 Tour de Corsa was the Stratos' first big test, but it didn't last long as the suspension uprights were too fragile, and the power from the Ferrari V6 was putting too much strain on them. Switching to cast uprights helped to fix this problem, and they would win at the Costa del Sol, which is the Firestone Rally. Depending on which engine it had, the Stratos weighed between 900 and 950 kilos and had 275 horsepower in race trim. So the Stratos was homologated in time for the 1974 World Rally Championship, but unlike the previous season, the championship was much smaller due to the oil crisis. Instead of 13 rounds, it had 8, with the Monte Carlo and Swedish rallies being the most notable absences from the calendar. Lancia and Fiat would be the two main protagonists for the season. While Fiat won the first round in Portugal, Lancia would be third in Kenya before no scoring in Finland and winning 2 in a row at San Remo and Canada, although San Remo is where the Stratos first made its debut, before a 4th, 3rd and 1st to round out the season, and then they would win the season and in turn absolutely thrash the parent company. In 1975 and 1976, they'd repeat that feat. The Stratos wasn't the lightest car in the field by any stretch, but because it had about 280 horsepower in race spec, they were able to circumvent that weight disadvantage by just powering on through. Typical Italians, really. It works out at about 305 horsepower per tonne, which by 1974 standards is a lot. But because it was shorter than an MX-5, it was agile as anything, but apparently not easy to drive in the slightest. And it had a few reliability issues, but then again, 1970s Italian sports cars, it's a feature. And actually, the only hope that the other cars had is when a Stratos broke down. In 1975, Lancia won again, with Fiat beating Opel by a single point. Then in 1976, Lancia absolutely destroyed everybody. They had nearly double the points of Opel in second, and Fiat scored a lowly 32 points to finish 7th. It looked like the Stratos was going to be this unbeatable monster that everybody would have to keep up with. They'd either have to change the rules or the other manufacturers would have to spend money. But it would be Fiat that came to everybody's rescue. Sort of. As mentioned, Fiat had bought Lancia in 1969, and Lancia had done incredibly well to build the brand back up and bring attention through success, as it had won 3 Montes back to back. But Fiat saw the success of Lancia and the Stratos and said, nope, can't have that, because they wanted a car with their name winning the WRC, not one of their subsidiaries. Despite Fiat taking the money from Lancia and dumping it into the 131 Abarth, which would then win the championship in 1977, 78 and 80, the Stratos was still a highly competitive machine, winning rallies and now suffering a power deficit thanks to the FIA banning 24-valve engines in Group 4 in 1978. Lancia would take the Stratos and change it into an endurance racer, but it didn't have any of the success its rally car older brother had in international competition, but it was winning in Italian championships. It also entered the Group 5 category in Rallycross, where it was tested by Franz Wirtz, the father of the F1 driver Alex. It had a 3-litre engine, well, one of the prototypes had a 3-litre engine, which must have been chucking out insane amounts of power. But even though it was down on power and down on funding and other bits and pieces to do with Fiat and the FIA, it was still winning rallies. It won 18 rallies in total, the last one coming in 1981, just before the FIA switched the rally regulations over to Group B. But while we remember it as being a dominant rally machine, those who have driven one will be quick to point out that it's not all rosy on the inside. Jeremy Clarkson once said that you have to drive the car almost sideways, as if the pedals were designed to be operated from the passenger seat, and Sam Hancock of Petrolicious said that you have to drive with your head put in exactly the right place because the wraparound nature of the windscreen makes it difficult to see out of, and the overall experience is just uncomfortable because your left knee is getting abused by the steering wheel and your right knee is getting hammered by the gear stick. And both said exactly the same thing. That doesn't matter. I don't know if it's some sort of free pass that some cars get or some manufacturers get or some countries' cars get. You'd think that if the car was built in France or Germany or Britain or South Africa, it would be a meme, but I don't know. Maybe it's because of passion and other swear words, but it does sound like a rather uncomfortable experience. But that doesn't change the fact that this wedgie boy with its short wheelbase, V6 engine, wide stance and Alitalia airline sponsorship has become the blueprint for designing a car to suit what you want it to do. In the later years, Audi would come along and change the game further, bringing four-wheel drive. The Group B cars would define utter performance, while the Group A cars were a return to running cars that you could actually buy. And while it was unreliable at times, cramped, uncomfortable and awful to drive at slow speed and twitchy at high speed, it was not just a success story for Fiat or for Lancia, it became a success story for Italy as a whole. It was Fiat's money that allowed Lancia to take on the project. It was Lancia deciding that they were going to comply with the letter of the law rather than the spirit, and it was Bertoni's avant-garde design that made it look how it did, and it was Ferrari's V6s that powered them. As Sam Hancock said, it's not your average homologation special. They didn't whack a massive engine into a car that never had a massive engine to start with. They didn't make an aluminium panelled version instead of the steel one. They bred this car to have its entire existence based around being a rally car. A winning rally car at that. When you add it all up, it can only be described as... it's an icon. So then, a look at the Lancia Stratos and its rally successes in the 1970s. If this has been a good trip down memory lane, then do like the video so I know a good job was done, and for more like this, get subscribed with the bell on so you never miss out on any future content. Massive thanks to the fine bunch of lads at Patreon and the members for the continued support. And if you want to help out with the picture purchasing piggy bank and keeping things running around here, a link to Patreon is in the description, along with links to Discord, socials, and other bits and bobs. Or there's super thanks for the one and done donations under the video if that's more your thing. So until next time, I've been Millward. Have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.